I just lived through my own HOA horror show. The kind where the president tries to gift your deeded parking spot to her son and his shiny red Porsche, then shrugs when you talk about a lawful tow. She said he could park there because, well, he's her son. Cute excuse. Too bad I had petty revenge on my mind and karma on speed dial. Before I get into the mess, tell me where you're listening from today. Name's Kyle Trass. This all kicked off with a lipstick red Porsche in my deeded spot. Number 27. It's right by the elevator in our underground garage, a perfect location I paid for when my wife Jill and I bought our condo. We wanted simple. We wanted quiet. What we got was an HOA, never simple, never quiet, and a president named Karen Anthony. Her son Fred drove that Porsche like it was his crown and my spot was his throne. It started on a Monday morning. I headed down at 7 a.m., coffee in hand, ready to drive my big honest Ford to the park and ride. My Ford's not fancy, but it's paid for. It works hard, and it hauls what you ask it to haul. Only this time, my truck wasn't where it belonged. It had been moved to the guest overflow, felt like a football field away. And there in spot 27, under buzzing fluorescent lights, sat the Porsche. Low to the ground, glossy, smug. It looked like a spaceship that came to Earth just to annoy me. I stood there blinking. Maybe someone new didn't understand the rules. Maybe an honest mistake. I climbed into my truck, drove off, and figured it would fix itself. It didn't. Tuesday morning, same scene. My truck in the far corner. The red Porsche tucked into my space like it paid the mortgage for 3B. This time I caught the driver. He looked all of 20, with slicked back hair, a smooth jaw, and a smirk that probably arrived before he did. He hopped out, flipped his keys in the air like he was throwing bait, and wandered to the elevator without even a nod. That's when the first spark fired. I'm a fair guy, but I don't do well with being ignored. And I don't do well with people messing with my stuff. I wrote a note and tucked it under his wiper. Kept it polite. Hi, this is a deeded parking spot. It belongs to Unit 3B. Please use guest parking. Thanks. I even added a smiley face. I am not a monster. Wednesday, the note was gone. The Porsche was back. And my truck was again in the same distant corner. The smiley face clearly failed its mission. I decided to wait. 5 minutes later, the elevator dinged, and out stepped Smirkface himself. Fred. I walked over. Hey, I said, keeping my tone calm. I think you missed my note. This is my spot, he said. He gave me a slow once-over, glanced at the Porsche, then back at me. My mom said I could park here. His mom. HOA president. Of course. With all due respect to your mom, I said. The deed to my unit says spot 27 is mine. It's legally my property. He shrugged like I'd asked him the time. Talk to my mom then. He slid into the Porsche and shot off, leaving me standing in a cloud of expensive exhaust that smelled like a perfume ad and bad decisions. That night I laid out the story for Jill. She's the calm one between us. She organizes, keeps receipts, and talks me down when I start listing the types of trouble I'm willing to get into. As I spoke, her eyes narrowed, not angry but focused. So, she said, Fred Anthony is moving your truck and taking your spot. Yep. And his mother, the queen of this castle, gave him her blessing. Jill sighed, pulled a notebook from a drawer, and clicked a pen. Okay, here's what we're not going to do. We are not going to yell. We are not going to slash tires. We are not going to start a shouting match in the garage. I frowned. That was most of my plan. She gave me a small smile. I know. We're going to win the boring way. The way that leaves them with no angle, no excuse, and no place to run. Jill pulled the bylaws. I pulled our deed and old emails from the property manager. My spot was clearly listed as deeded property. The bylaws were clear. Unauthorized vehicles can be towed from deeded or assigned spaces at the owner's expense after proper notice. Simple to read. Harder to enforce unless you know exactly how. Thursday, I did something I hated. I left the truck where it was and took the bus the whole way. Before I left, I parked my Ford right behind the Porsche, not blocking it, just close enough to make the point. I snapped a photo. License plate, spot number, signs in the background. When I got home that evening, my truck was back in guest parking, and the Porsche was still sitting there, smug as a cat in a sunbeam, which meant only one thing. Someone had moved my truck, not once but repeatedly, and not with my permission. We checked the house. My spare was safe in the lockbox. Then I remembered the valet key. I kept it in a little magnetic case tucked up under the rear wheel well for emergencies. Not smart anymore, apparently. They'd found it. Now it wasn't just about a parking spot. They were breaking into my vehicle to steal my space. Okay, Jill said, voice low and steady. That crosses a line. I was already across it. I was building a bridge to the next line. But she was right. We needed to be smart, methodical, unshakable. The next day I bought a small HD window cam with a timestamp. We mounted it inside our living room window, pointed straight at the garage ramp. Perfect view of the entrance. Then we set a tiny pin cam facing spot 27 from our storage locker grill. A clean angle on the space itself. The plan was simple. Record everything, and like clockwork, the pattern showed up. Every morning, here came Freddy. He would slide into spot 27, lock the Porsche with a smug beep, and stroll off to the elevator. A minute later, George Anthony, Karen's husband, would come down. He'd walk straight to my truck, kneel by the rear wheel, reach under the fender, and my lights would blink. The locker cam caught his hand, fishing out the valet key. He'd climb in, move my truck to guest parking, lock it, and tuck the key back into the same spot. Family operation, efficient, brazen. We let the cameras roll for days and saved every second. Proof is nice. But proof without a plan is a story, not a solution. Jill sat at the table and drafted a letter that could have passed for a lawyer's work. It referenced our deed, quoted sections of the HOA bylaws word for word, and included a polite but firm notice. As of this date, any unauthorized vehicle in spot 27 would be towed at the owner's expense. It listed PRC Towing by name. It gave 24/7 contact numbers. It noted that our certified notices would serve as written warning. We printed 2 copies. One addressed to President, HOA, attention, Karen Anthony, and one to Mr. and Mrs. George Anthony, resident. We sent both by certified mail, return receipt requested. I love that little green card. When it comes back with a signature, there's no more, "We never got it." There's no wiggle room. Then we went to a print shop. We ordered 2 heavy-gauge metal tow signs, PRC's standard. Red letters on white. We got property manager approval in writing and the sign permit on file. The signs read, private property, deeded parking, space 27. Unauthorized vehicles will be towed at owner's expense and risk. PRC Towing, phone number. I bought anchor bolts and a length of chain. I mounted one sign directly on the concrete wall at eye level at the front of the space. I hung the other from a chain right over the middle of spot 27, centered so you literally had to drive under it. You couldn't miss them unless you were blind or you didn't care. Now we had the stack. Video evidence of the scheme, certified letters with return receipts, approval from the property manager, and big clear signs. Everything by the book. Which meant the next step was simple. Wait for Fred to ignore all of it. We didn't wait long. The very next morning, right on schedule, he rolled into the garage. He didn't slow, didn't hesitate. He parked in 27 like the signs were decoration. I stood at our living room window with my phone, watching through the glass. Jill stood next to me, also filming, cool and steady. He turned off the car, got out, and looked right at the new wall sign. Then he tipped his head back to look at the one hanging overhead. A slow smile crept across his face, the kind that says rules are for other people. He gave his head a little shake like our effort was adorable. Then he sauntered to the elevator without a second glance. That's when I knew this wouldn't be easy. He wasn't just breaking a rule. He was enjoying breaking it. He felt untouchable, like his mom's position made him bulletproof. Fine. Let's see how bulletproof a tow hook feels. Jill didn't say, "I told you so." She just said, "He saw the signs." He absolutely saw them. I nodded. "Yep, and he doesn't care." I took a breath and dialed PRC Towing. "PRC Towing, this is Dave," came a rough, friendly voice. "Hi, Dave," I said, keeping it even. "My name is Kyle Traz. I'm at 1500 Lakeside Drive. I need a vehicle removed from my private deeded parking spot." He waited. I gave him everything. Spot 27, a red Porsche, plate number, make and model. I told him the space was clearly marked with his company's tow signs, that I had deed documents in hand and property manager approval, and that certified notices had been sent to the vehicle's owners days ago. I added that we had video proof of ongoing unauthorized use. There was a pause and a soft whistle. "You've done your homework," Dave said, sounding impressed. "Most people just call screaming. We've got a truck that can be there in 20 minutes. It's a flatbed, so we won't scratch his precious little sports car." I almost told him I didn't care if they scratched it, but I caught myself. "Sounds good, Dave. I'll meet your driver downstairs." Jill and I went down to the garage. We stood a little ways off, giving the tow truck room to work. Jill was still filming. It's important to document everything. You never know what will matter later. A few minutes later, the big flatbed tow truck rumbled down the ramp into the garage. The driver, a big guy with a beard and a no-nonsense look on his face, hopped out. "Kyle Traz," he asked. "That's me," I said, shaking his hand. I showed him my driver's license and a copy of the deed page that listed the parking spot. He glanced at it, then at the signs. "Yep, you're good to go," he said. "Let's get this thing out of your hair." The process was fascinating to watch. He was a professional. He laid down chocks, unspooled the winch cable, and carefully placed soft straps around the Porsche's tires. There was no loud crashing or banging. It was a quiet, efficient removal. The car was slowly, gently pulled up onto the flatbed. The driver was just securing the final safety chains. When the elevator doors dinged open, out walked Fred. He stopped dead in his tracks. The smirk was gone. His face went from confused to furious in about 2 seconds. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" he yelled, jogging toward the truck. "That's my car." The tow truck driver didn't even flinch. He just continued tightening a strap. "This gentleman," he said, nodding at me, "says you're in his spot. He's got the paperwork to prove it. So I'm towing your car." Fred turned his attention to me. His eyes were blazing. "You can't do this." "I can," I said calmly. "I warned you." "I left a note. I told you in person. I sent your parents a certified letter. There are 2 giant signs right there." I pointed at them. He wasn't listening. He was walking toward me, his fists clenched. "You're going to call him off right now," he said, getting in my face. I smiled. "Buddy, gravity's easier to stop than this paperwork." I could smell the cologne he was wearing. "No," I said, "I'm not." That's when he shoved me. It wasn't a huge shove, but it was hard enough to make me take a step back. I'm not a small guy, and I don't like being touched. All the frustration from the past week boiled over. I grabbed the front of his shirt, balling the expensive fabric in my fist. "You want to try that again?" I growled. My voice didn't sound like my own. For a split second, I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. He was all bluster. He had never been in a real fight in his life. Before either of us could do anything else, the tow truck driver stepped between us. He was a lot bigger than both of us. "All right, that's enough," he said, putting a heavy hand on Fred's chest and pushing him back. "You need to calm down, kid." Neighbors stepped between us. No second round. I kept my hands open and high. Just then, the elevator doors opened again. This time, it was Karen and George Anthony. Karen took one look at the scene, her son's car on a tow truck, me holding his shirt, a giant tow truck driver playing referee, and she exploded. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, marching toward us. "George, do something." George, a beefy man who always looked like he was chewing on something sour, just glared at me. "You're going to regret this, Traz," he grumbled. Karen got right up to the driver. "You take my son's car off that truck this instant. I am the president of this HOA. I forbid this." The driver just looked at her, then at his clipboard. "Ma'am, your name is Karen Anthony." "Yes, it is. And this is your son, Fred?" "Yes." "Well, this gentleman has a legal right to this spot. You were notified. The area is posted. The vehicle is being impounded. You can pick it up at our lot. You'll need to pay the tow fee and the storage fees. Have a nice day." He said it all in a perfectly monotone voice. It was beautiful. He handed me a receipt, climbed back into his cab, and with a roar of the engine, he drove the truck with the little red Porsche strapped to its back up the ramp and out of our lives for now. Karen stood there, her mouth open, speechless for the first time I'd ever seen. Fred looked like he was about to cry. George was just staring at me with pure, uncut hatred. A few of our neighbors had come out to see what the commotion was about. Neighbor Bill from across the hall was peering around the corner, his eyes wide. They had all seen it. They saw Fred shove me. They saw Karen's meltdown. Jill was still standing there, phone held steady, recording the whole thing. The first battle was over, and we had won. But as I looked at the fury on Karen Nannoni's face, I knew she wasn't just going to pay the fee and forget about it. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning of the war. The silence in the garage after the tow truck left was thick and heavy. Fred was still sputtering, looking at the empty spot where his car used to be. George was breathing heavily through his nose, his eyes locked on me. But Karen recovered quickly. Her shock turned into cold, sharp fury. She straightened her blazer, smoothed her hair, and pointed a perfectly manicured finger at me. "You," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "You have just made a very, very big mistake. There's an HOA meeting on Wednesday. You will be there. We are going to discuss your violations." "My violations?" I asked, genuinely confused. "I haven't violated anything. Your son was illegally parked in my spot. I had him towed. It's that simple." "Oh, it's not simple at all," she snapped. "You created a hostile environment. You installed unauthorized signage. You harassed my son." She was just making things up. "The signs are from the tow company," I said, pointing. "And your son shoved me. My wife has it all on video." Jill, right on cue, lowered her phone slightly, making it obvious she was still recording. Karen's eyes darted to the phone and then back to me. A flicker of something, maybe caution, crossed her face, but it was gone in an instant. "Wednesday," she repeated. 7 might be there." Then she turned on her heel, grabbed Fred by the arm, and marched him and George back to the elevator, leaving me and Jill standing there in the sudden quiet. "Well," I said, letting out a long breath. "That went about as well as I expected." Jill finally stopped recording. "We have the shove on video, Kyle. That's assault." "I know," I said, "but pressing charges would just make this uglier. Let's see what she tries to pull at this meeting first." Over the next 2 days, the neighborhood was buzzing. You could feel it. People would see me in the hall and either give me a quick nervous smile and hurry away, or a little thumbs up when they thought no one was looking. Neighbor Bill caught me by the mailboxes. "Heard you had a little excitement the other day," he said, trying to sound casual. "You could say that, Bill." He lowered his voice. "Look, Kyle, just be careful. Karen plays for keeps. She's been running this place like her own little kingdom for 10 years. She doesn't like being challenged." "I'm not challenging her," I said. "I'm just trying to park my truck." Bill just shook his head. "Tower, that's the same thing." When Wednesday night came, Jill and I were ready. We had a binder, a thick 3-ring binder. Jill had printed out everything. The relevant pages from our home's deed, the HOA bylaws with the parking sections highlighted, copies of the certified mail receipts, and high-quality still photos taken from the video footage. We had pictures of the Porsche in my spot on 10 different days. We had a picture of the signs. We had a picture of Fred shoving me. We were walking in there armed with facts. Karen, we knew, would be armed with opinions. The HOA meeting was held in the community room, which was really just a sad little space with folding chairs and a water-stained ceiling. When we walked in, the room went quiet. All the usual suspects were there. About 15 residents who actually showed up to these things. Karen, George, and Fred were sitting at the head table like a royal family holding court. Karen was in the center, a gavel in front of her. She banged it on the table, even though everyone was already silent. "The meeting will come to order," she announced. She went through the usual boring stuff first. The minutes from the last meeting, the treasurer's report. Then she took a deep breath. "Now for new business. The matter of the incident in the parking garage on Monday." She launched into a speech that was a work of fiction. She painted me as a neighborhood bully, a rogue resident who'd taken the law into his own hands. She claimed I had aggressively confronted her visiting son. "Visiting?" I cut in. "I couldn't help it. He lives here. He's been parking in my spot for 2 weeks. Karen slammed the gavel. "You are out of order, Mr. Traz. You will speak when spoken to." She then brought up the signs. Furthermore, Mr. Traz installed these large unsightly signs, which are a clear violation of Article 7, Section 4 of the bylaws, regarding unapproved modifications to common areas. This was her big move. She was trying to nail me on a technicality, but Jill was ready. She stood up. "Point of order, Madam President," Jill said, her voice calm and clear. "May I read from the bylaws?" Karen looked flustered. She couldn't really say no. "Proceed," she said, waving a dismissive hand. Jill opened our binder. "Article 7, Section 4, which you cited, prohibits permanent alterations. However, Article 9, Section 2, which covers parking, explicitly states that residents are permitted to post standard commercially produced vehicle-related signage, including towaway warnings in their deed spaces. The signs Mr. Thierry installed are the standard signs provided by the HOA's own contracted towing company, PRC Towing. And guest passes do not apply to deed property," Jill said. A murmur went through the room. A few people looked impressed. Karen's face was turning ablotchy red. That's your interpretation," she sputtered. "It's no 10 interpretation," I said, standing up next to Jill. "It's what the words say. And while we're on the subject of rules, let's talk about the rule your son broke." I opened my own copy of the binder and passed it to neighbor Bill, who was sitting in the front row. Page 1 is a copy of my deed. Page 2 is the bylaw about deed spots being exclusive property. Pages 3 through 12 are photos of Fred Anoni's car in my spot. Page 13 is a photo of the certified mail receipt you signed for, Karen, acknowledging our warning. And page 14 is a picture of your son assaulting me. The room erupted. Everyone was trying to get a look at the binder as Bill passed it along. Karen was banging her gavel like a maniac. "Order, order. This is not a courtroom. These photos are inadmissible. They're just pictures." "Karen," I said, "pictures of what really happened. Your son stole my spot. I followed the rules to get it back." He shoved me. "You had a tantrum. The end. Now about that tow fee. It was $250 for the tow plus $50 a day for storage. It's been 3 days. That's $400. Are you going to pay it? Or are you going to let the fees keep piling up on your son's car?" Karen stood up, her whole body trembling with rage. She wasn't just angry about the car anymore. This was personal. I had embarrassed her in front of her subjects. "This has nothing to do with a parking spot," she hissed, leaning over the table. "This has to do with you. With what you did to my family? You think we've forgotten? You think we don't know who you are and what you did to my George?" The room went dead silent. Everyone was staring at her, then at me. I had no idea what she was talking about. What I did to George. I barely knew the man. I just saw him moving my truck on the security camera. Before this, I don't think we'd ever spoken. I don't know what you're talking about, I said. Honestly, George, who had been silent this whole time, finally spoke. He pushed his chair back and stood up, his face a mask of old, bitter anger. Oh, you know, he said, his voice a low rumble. You know exactly what she's talking about. You just don't want anyone else to. The meeting had gone completely off the rails. It wasn't about bylaws anymore. It was about something else. Something from the past that I was completely blind to. And whatever it was the real reason for all of this. The air in the community room was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Everyone was staring, waiting for me to respond to George's accusation. I just stood there completely baffled. Seriously, I said, looking from George to Karen. I have no idea what you're talking about. What did I supposedly do? Karen let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a nasty sound. Oh, what did I do? He asks. So innocent. So forgetful. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a loud, dramatic whisper that everyone in the room could hear. You ruined my husband's career, Mr. Traz. You cost him his job. You took away his livelihood, and you did it with the stroke of a pen. I racked my brain. I'm a safety compliance inspector for a large construction firm. My job is to go to job sites and make sure everything is up to code, that procedures are being followed, that nobody is cutting corners that could get someone hurt or killed. I write a lot of reports. Most of them are boring. Some of them are not. They lead to fines, to work stoppages, to people getting fired. It tried to place George. I looked at his face at the bitter set of his jaw. Nothing. I inspect dozens of sites a year, I said. I don't know every person on every crew. What company did you work for? Don't play dumb with me, George gnarled. Apex Construction. I was a foreman 10 years ago. Firing March 1st, crash May 12th, 2 months apart. Apex Construction. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. 10 years ago. I remembered it instantly. It was a big downtown high-rise project. There had been an anonymous tip about safety violations on the night shift. Scaffolding not properly secured. Workers not using safety harnesses at height. Falsified safety logs. It was a mess, a disaster waiting to happen. I had been the inspector sent to do a surprise audit. I spent a week on that site documenting everything. The foreman in charge of that shift had been belligerent, dismissive. He tried to block my access, tried to hide the logs. I remembered writing his name down in my final report. George Anthony. My report had been damning. I didn't recommend he be fired. That wasn't my call. I just reported the facts, the dozens of violations I found. The company's safety board reviewed it, and they fired him immediately. He was a liability they couldn't afford. I remember the Apex job, I said, my voice quiet. I remember the report. Your crew was running one of the most dangerous sites I'd ever seen. People could have died, George. We were on a deadline, he shot back. We were making up for lost time. A few shortcuts, that's all. Nobody got hurt. Not on your watch, maybe, I said. But that's not how safety works. You don't wait for someone to fall 60 stories before you make them wear a harness. Karen stepped forward, her eyes blazing. That report cost him everything. His pension, his reputation. He couldn't get another job as a foreman anywhere in the city. He had to take labor work for half the pay. She was building up a head of steam, her voice getting louder and more shrill. And then the accident. She paused for dramatic effect. A few months after you got him fired, he was working a smaller job. A tired crew, a rush schedule, the kind of job he had to take because of you. A wall collapsed. It crushed his leg and hurt his back. He hasn't had a day without pain since. We lost everything. We had to sell our house. We had to move in here. All because of you and your precious little report. Now it all made sense. The irrational hatred, the entitlement, the belief that they were owed something. In her mind, I was the villain of their life story. I was the one who had pushed the first domino. She blamed me for the firing, and she blamed me for the accident that happened months later at a different company. It was a twisted kind of logic, but for them it was the absolute truth. Karen, I said, trying to be reasonable, even though my heart was pounding. I'm sorry about his accident. I truly am, but you can't blame me for that. And you can't blame me for him being fired. He was fired for willfully ignoring safety regulations. I was just doing my job. Your job? She spat the words out. Your job was to ruin us. And now you live here in our building with your nice truck and your perfect little life. And you have the nerve to tow my son's car over a parking spot. That spot is the least you owe us. The room was dead silent. The other residents looked uncomfortable, like they had walked into a private family drama they wanted no part of. They had come for a fight about parking, and they had gotten a decade-old story of loss and blame. Jill stepped up beside me and put a hand on my arm. I think this meeting is over, she said to the room at large. This is clearly a personal vendetta, not an HOA issue. She was right. There was no winning this argument. Facts didn't matter. The bylaws didn't matter. All that mattered was the grudge Karen was holding on to. We turned and walked out of the room. We could feel every eye on our backs. As we reached the door, Karen's voice rang out cold and clear. "This isn't over, Traz. I'm the president of this association. I will find a way to make you pay. I will use every bylaw, every rule, every trick in the book to make your life here a misery. You started this 10 years ago. I'm going to finish it." The threat hung in the air, heavy and promising. This wasn't about a red Porsche anymore. It was about revenge, and Karen Anthony was just getting started. The battle was over, but the war had just found its real cause. Walking back to our apartment, my mind was racing. The revelation in that meeting changed everything. It wasn't just a spat with a crazy HOA president anymore. It was a long, simmering feud I hadn't even known I was a part of. "Can you believe that?" I said to Jill as we closed our front door behind us. "She's been hating me for 10 years, and I didn't even know her name." Jill was already at her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "I'm looking up the Apex construction incident," she said. "If there were public records or news reports, I want to see them." Jill was always 10 steps ahead. While I was still processing the emotion of it all, she was gathering data. "It's insane, Jill," I said, pacing our living room. "It was doing my job. That site was a death trap. What did she want me to do? Look the other way? Let someone get killed so her husband could keep his job? Of course not," she said, not looking up from the screen. "But that's not how she sees it. In her story, you're the bad guy. George was a good man pushed too hard, and you were the cold-hearted bureaucrat who kicked him when he was down." I stopped pacing. "So, what do I do? We're living under the same roof as someone who thinks I'm responsible for ruining her life. We keep doing what we're doing," she said firmly. "We live our lives. We follow the rules, and we don't let her bully us. We document everything she does. Every threat, every nasty email, every little thing. We build our case." Montage time. Karen was true to her word. The very next day, Thepity War began. I woke up to find a bright orange sticker on the driver's side window of my truck, which was peacefully parked in its own spot, number 27. It was an HA violation notice. The reason vehicle is a commercial truck prohibited in residential parking. My Ford F-150 is a standard pickup truck. It's not a commercial vehicle. I've never used it for work. I peeled the sticker off. It left a sticky, gummy residue that took me 15 minutes to scrub off. I took a picture of the sticker first. Of course, Jill filed it away in our digital Karen folder. 2 days later, another notice. This time, it was for the small wreath Jill had hung on our front door. It was a tasteful seasonal wreath. Apparently, it violated a bylaw about adornments to common area-facing doors. We'd had a wreath on that door for 2 years without a peep from anyone. We took it down, but not before taking a picture of it, and a picture of the 5 other doors on our floor that also had wreaths. Selective enforcement, another item for the folder. The pettiness was relentless. One morning, all the plants on our small balcony were mysteriously knocked over, spilling dirt everywhere. There was no way to prove who did it, but we had our suspicions. We just cleaned it up, Jill filming the whole time. I'll admit, it was getting to me. It was like being pecked to death by a duck. A very annoying, very persistent duck. I felt like I was constantly looking over my shoulder. "We have to fight back," I told Jill one night. "We can't just keep taking this." "I agree," she said, "but we have to be smart. We can't break any rules. We have to use her own playbook against her." That's when I had my first truly petty but completely legal idea. Karen had started holding what she called community solidarity rallies on the sidewalk, right outside our building. It was really just her and a few of her cronies holding signs that said things like, "Stop neighborhood bullies." They would stand there in the evenings right under our living room window. The HOA bylaws were very specific about watering schedules for the lawn and the flower beds that lined the sidewalk. You were only supposed to water between 500 a.m. and 8 a.m. or between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. to conserve water. Karen's little rallies usually started around 6:30 p.m. The sprinkler heads for that particular patch of lawn were controlled by a timer in a maintenance box that wasn't locked. The bylaws didn't say you couldn't manually run a sprinkler cycle during the approved hours. So, one evening, as Karen was in the middle of a passionate speech about resident accountability, I took a little stroll down to that maintenance box. I turned the dial to zone 4 and pushed the manual start button. A moment later, 3 large sprinkler heads popped up, and a beautiful arc of water rained down directly on Karen and her protest. These shrieks were glorious. They scattered like wet cats. I just strolled back inside, a small smile on my face. I hadn't broken a single rule. I was just helping to water the petunias. Jill was watching from the window, shaking her head and laughing. "Kyle," she said, "that was terrible. I know, I replied. Felt great, though. The rally stopped after that. My next idea came a week later. Karen and George were not early risers. Fred certainly wasn't. But the HOA rules allowed for maintenance and landscaping work to begin at 8 a.m. on weekdays. I owned a very powerful, very loud gas-powered leaf blower. I used it in the fall to clean up our little patio. One Tuesday morning at 8:01 a.m. precisely, I decided our patio needed a very, very thorough cleaning. Our patio was on the same side of the building as the Anoni's master bedroom. I fired up that two-stroke engine and it roared to life like a jet taking off. I spent a solid 30 minutes blowing every single speck of dust from one side of the patio to the other and then back again. It was the cleanest that patio had ever been. I couldn't hear if they were yelling. The leaf blower was too loud. These little victories felt good. They were a way of fighting back on my own terms, using the same rulebook she was using to torment us. But it was also draining. Living like this in a constant state of low-grade warfare was exhausting. And the central problem remained unsolved. The red Porsche was still sitting in the impound lot. The fees were climbing every single day. It was now over $1,000. Karen was refusing to pay on principal. The tow yard had called me twice, asking what the owner was doing. She's a very principled woman, I told the manager. He just grunted. The final straw in Thepity War came a week after the leaf blower incident. We received an official letter from the HOA's lawyer. It was a cease and desist order demanding that I stop harassing the Anthony family with noise pollution and targeted sprinkler attacks. They were actually paying a lawyer to complain about me leaf-blowing my own patio during approved hours. This is insane, I said, dropping the letter on the table. She's spending our HOA dues to sue us for things that aren't even illegal. Jill read the letter, her expression grim. She's escalating Kyle. She's not going to stop until one of us breaks. I looked at the letter at the smug legal jargon. She was right. The petty jabs were fun, but they weren't going to solve the problem. It was time to stop playing her game and go back to playing mine. It was time to bring the focus back to the car. The war of minor annoyances was over. It was time to get serious again. The lawyer's letter was a turning point. It was Karen spending our own money, the HOA dues we all paid to harass us legally. The absurdity of it snapped me out of the petty revenge cycle. It was time to end this. The key was the car. The Porsche was the symbol of their arrogance. And now it was their biggest liability. I called Dave, the manager at PRC Towing. Dave, it's Kyle Traz, I said. The guy with the Porsche problem. Hey Kyle, he said. His voice sounded tired. Don't tell me you want to tow another one. No, I said I'm calling about the first one. She still hasn't picked it up, has she? Nope. The bill is up to, let's see, $1,850. She called yesterday and screamed at my receptionist for 20 minutes. Said it was all our fault. So what happens next? I asked, legally, what's the process? Well, he said, we've already sent HOA certified letters demanding payment. After 30 days, we can file for a lien on the vehicle for services rendered. It's called a garageman's lien. Once the lien is granted by the court, we can schedule a public auction to sell the car and recover our costs. A slow grin spread across my face. An auction? And anyone can bid at this public auction? I asked. Anyone with cash or a cashier's check, he confirmed. It's open to the public. I thanked him for the information and hung up. I looked at Jill. She has 10 more days to pay the bill, I said. And if she doesn't, the tow company is going to file a lien and auction off her son's car. Jill's eyes widened. And you want to? I want to be there, I said. I want to see the look on her face. The next 10 days were quiet, eerily quiet. No violation notices, no angry emails. It was like she was holding her breath. We learned through neighbor Bill that Fred was now taking the bus. The humiliation was apparently profound. He said Karen had been telling everyone she was fighting a principled battle against a corrupt towing company, and that she would win. She was living in a fantasy world. On the 31st day, I called Dave. She missed the deadline? I asked like a batter swinging at a ghost, he said. My lawyer filed the lien this morning. We should have a court date for the auction in about 3 or 4 weeks. The notice for the auction was posted in the newspaper and online as required by law. It was ADRI legal notice, public sale of a 2018 Porsche 911 Carrera VIN number to satisfy a lien. Jill and I started doing our research. We looked up the blue book value of the car. Even with a few years on it was worth a lot, probably around $80,000. The lien was only for a couple thousand. This car was going to sell, and it was going to sell for a lot more than the lien amount. By law, any money from the sale over and above the lien amount and auction costs would go back to the owner, in this case, Fred. Karen wasn't going to lose the full value of the car, but she was going to lose the car itself. And the public humiliation of it being sold off to pay a towing bill she refused to settle was to me priceless. Then I had another thought, a wild, audacious thought. What if we bought it? I said to Jill one night. She looked at me like I had grown a second head. Buy the Porsche? What on earth would we do with it? I don't know, I said, the idea taking shape. But think about it. It would be the ultimate checkmate. We buy the car that started this whole thing. We would own it free and clear. Kyle, that's crazy, she said. But she was smiling. The thought was just as appealing to her. We can't afford an $80,000 car. We wouldn't have to pay $80,000, I explained. We just have to be the highest bidder. Maybe people won't be paying attention. Maybe it'll go for cheap. It was a long shot, but the more I thought about it, the more I liked it. The day of the auction was bright and sunny. It was held in the parking lot of the tow yard. There were about 30 or 40 people there, a mix of serious-looking car dealers with clipboards and curious locals. The auctioneer was a fast-talking man in a cowboy hat. The Porsche was parked right in the front row. It had been washed and detailed. It looked beautiful. I saw Karen, George, and Fred standing off to one side. They were trying to look casual, but they were radiating tension. Karen was whispering furiously to a tough-looking man in a leather jacket that I didn't recognize. He kept nodding, not looking at her. Her proxy bidder. She wasn't going to bid herself. That would be too embarrassing. She was going to have this guy try to buy the car back. Jill and I had agreed on a limit. We had savings and we were willing to spend a certain amount for the principle of the thing. It was a crazy amount of money to spend on principle, but we had come this far. The auction started. A few boring sedans and a minivan went first. Then it was the Porsche's turn. All right, folks. Here's the one you've been waiting for, the auctioneer called out. A beautiful 911 Carrera. The lien amount is $2,800. Let's start the bidding at $3,000. Do I hear $3,000? A dealer in the front row raised his hand. I got 3 now. 4,400. Karen's proxy bidder raised his number. 4, now 5. 5. The bidding went up fast. 5, 10, 15,000. The dealers were in it. They knew what the car was worth. At 30,000, most of the locals had dropped out. At 40, it was just down to 2 dealers and Karen's proxy. At 50,000, one of the dealers shook his head and walked away. It was down to 1 dealer and the proxy. 51, the dealer shouted. 52, the proxy shot back. They went back and forth 1,000 at a time. 53, 54, 55. I could see Karen twisting a handkerchief in her hands. Her face was pale. At $60,000, the second dealer finally dropped out. Auctioneer, 60 even. Going once. Thayard went quiet. Jill squeezed my hand. The last dealer looked once, then shook his head. The auctioneer pointed at Karen's proxy. $60,000. Going once, going twice. This was it. She was going to get the car back for $60,000 plus the auction fees. She'd have to pay a fortune, but she'd get to keep the car. It would be a painful lesson, but not a total loss. But then I remembered the look on her face at that HOA meeting. The way she spat out the words, "What you did to my George." The way she promised to make our lives a misery. This wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. I looked at Jill. She saw the look in my eye and gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. I raised my bidding number. 60,050, I shouted. The entire crowd went silent and turned to look at me. The auctioneer's eyes lit up. We've got a new bidder. 60-50, he looked at Karen's proxy. The man looked stunned. He turned and looked at Karen. She was staring at me, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated shock and hatred. He said something to her. She shook her head violently. He looked back at the auctioneer and gave a slight shake of his head. He was out. $60-50, the auctioneer bellowed. Going once, going twice. Sold to bidder number 87 for $60-50. He pointed his gavel right at me. I had just bought a Porsche for $60-50 petty. Perfect. I looked over at Karen. Her mouth was moving, but no sound was coming out. She looked like she had been struck by lightning. The war wasn't over. I had just launched the final devastating attack, and I had no idea what came next. The aftermath of the auction was surreal. People were clapping me on the back, shaking my hand. The dealers who had lost out gave me respectful nods. They thought I just landed the deal of a lifetime. They had no idea this was the final move in a long, drawn-out neighborhood war. I walked over to the payment table, my heart still hammering in my chest. Jill was right beside me, a look of stunned disbelief on her face. "You actually did it," she whispered. "I actually did it," I whispered back. I signed the paperwork and handed over the cashier's check we had prepared just in case. The clerk gave me a temporary registration and the keys to the red Porsche. My red Porsche. As I was finishing up, Karen, George, and Fred approached. Their walk was slow, like a funeral procession. Karen's face was white with rage. Fred looked like a lost child. George just looked old and defeated. "You, Karen," hissed at me. The word was filled with so much poison it could have curdled milk. "You couldn't just let it go, could you? You had to humiliate us. You had to take this from him. You had every chance to prevent this, Karen," I said, my voice even. "All you had to do was pay the tow bill. The first day it was $250. You chose to let it get to this point. You chose to make it a principled stand. Well, principles can be expensive. What are you going to do with it? Fred asked. It was the first time he'd spoken to me without a smirk. His voice was small. Flaunt it. Park it in my spot every day just to rub it in. That was exactly what he would have done. It was probably what Karen expected me to do. A part of me, the petty part that loved the sprinkler incident, was tempted. But that wasn't the point. Winning wasn't about being a bigger bully than they were. No, Fred, I said, I'm not going to do that. I looked at Karen. This was never about the car. It was about the rules. It was about respect. You and your family decided you were above the rules. Today, you found out you're not. I turned and walked away, leaving them standing there in the middle of the tow yard. Jill and I got into the Porsche. It smelled like leather and arrogance. The engine turned over with a deep, throaty rumble. It was an incredible machine. I had to admit that. We drove it home in near silence. When we pulled into the garage, I parked it. Not in spot 27. I parked it in a visitor spot. I drove my truck out of the guest area and parked it right in the center of spot 27. It looked perfect there. That night, Jill and I had a long talk. What were we going to do with a $60,000 sports car we didn't need, or really even want? Selling it was the obvious answer. We could probably even make a small profit, but that didn't feel right. It felt unfinished. The next morning, I made a few phone calls. The first was to a mechanic I knew, a good guy named S. The second was to a local vocational school that had an auto mechanics program. The third was to the scrapyard. A plan was forming. Saturday, we trailered the Porsche to S's shop. 6 hours later, we had the engine, transmission, brakes, seats, and electronics tagged for the vocational school. Monday, their truck took the lot. Students would learn on the real thing. The director of the program shook my hand so hard I thought he was going to break it. This donation is incredible, Mr. Traz, he said. Our students will be learning on state-of-the-art equipment for years because of this. It felt good. It felt right. It felt better than making a profit ever could have. But there was one thing left. The shell. The stripped-down empty frame of the Porsche. It was just a skeleton now sitting on stands at S's shop. That afternoon, the claw truck rolled into S's lot, chained the shell, and we followed it to the scrapyard. This part was just for me. This was the punctuation mark at the end of the long, ugly sentence. The scrapyard was a mountain range of twisted metal. The driver deposited the Porsche's frame in a cleared area. And then the crusher started moving. It was a massive hydraulic press. It moved slowly with a deep, groaning hum. It descended on third frame. There was a loud crunch as the roof buckled. Glass snowed, paint spidered white. The air tasted like hot pennies. Then a series of sickening shrieks and groans as the metal twisted and folded in on itself. The machine pressed and pressed relentlessly until the sleek, beautiful lines of the Porsche were compressed into a small, ugly, rectangular cube of scrap metal. It was about the size of a washing machine. As the crusher pulled back, a car screeched to a halt at the edge of the yard. It was Karen. She must have followed us. She jumped out of her car and ran toward the fence, her face a mess of tears and fury. "What did you do?" she screamed, her voice cracking. "What did you do?" She pointed a trembling finger at the cube of metal. "You killed his car, you monster. You killed it." I looked at her, then at the crushed metal, then back at her. I felt a strange sense of calm. The anger was gone. The need for revenge was gone. Allie felt was a kind of weary finality. "No, Karen," I said, my voice quiet, but clear enough for her to hear over the hum of the machinery. "I didn't kill it," I paused, letting the words hang in the air. Choices did. She just stared at me, her mouth open, finally defeated. Her rage had nowhere left to live. The war was over. The noise was done. All that was left was the silence. In the weeks that followed, a strange quiet settled over our community. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. Not at first. It was the tense, awkward silence that comes after a big family fight. People didn't know how to act around me. Some neighbors, like Bill, would give me a slow nod, a look that said, "Wow, you really did it." Others would avoid eye contact, scurrying into their apartments when they saw me in the hall. They were afraid of Karen, and now maybe they were a little afraid of me too. I had shown that I was willing to go all the way. How far is too far? I'd been asking myself that for months. I guess I found out. Karen, George, and Fred were like ghosts. We'd see them get their mail, but they never spoke. They never made eye contact. The fight was gone out of them. The fire in Karen's eyes had been replaced by something dull and empty. She looked smaller somehow. About a month after the crusher incident, a for sale sign went up in front of their unit. 2 weeks after that, it was sold. A moving truck came on a Saturday. We watched from our window as they loaded up their boxes. It was a quiet, sad little affair. There were no community solidarity rallies to see them off. When the truck pulled away, it felt like the whole building took a collective breath. A new family moved in. They were nice. They had 2 young kids. They parked their minivan in their assigned spot and never caused a single problem. The HOA held an emergency meeting to elect a new president. Neighbor Bill, to my surprise, nominated himself. Someone's got to do it, he told me later. And I figure after watching you and Karen go at it, I know what not to do. He won. He's been a fair, if slightly bewildered, president ever since. The petty violation notices stopped. The wreaths went back up on people's doors. Life returned to normal, or a new kind of normal. My truck sits in spot 27 every night. Bus days are my choice now, not Karen's. Small thing. Monumental victory. Jill and I still have the Karen binder and the digital folder full of videos and photos. We keep it as a reminder. A reminder of what can happen when a small injustice is left to fester. A reminder of how easily a person with a little bit of power can be corrupted by an old grudge. Sometimes late at night, I think about it all. I think about that red Porsche. I think about the look on Karen's face at the auction and the sound of the metal crushing at the scrapyard. Was I right to do all that? Legally, yes. I was in the right every step of the way. I followed every rule. I documented everything. I won. But was I a hero? No, I don't think so. There was a part of me that enjoyed the fight. There was a grim satisfaction in turning the sprinklers in Karen. There was a cold, hard pleasure in placing that final bid at the auction. I was pushed, and I pushed back harder. I was stubborn. I was petty. I wanted to win, and I was willing to be ruthless to do it. I could have stopped at the first tow. I could have just kept paying to have the car towed every day until they gave up. That would have been the cleaner path. But her arrogance, her hypocrisy, and most of all that 10-year-old grudge she was nursing, it made me want to do more than just win the argument. It made me want to dismantle the whole rotten structure of her power. I wanted her to understand that her actions had consequences she couldn't control. I wanted to teach her a lesson that only a total, undeniable defeat could deliver. The epilogue to this story is that peace is back. But it's a messy kind of peace bought at a high price. I look at my community now and it's better. It's fairer. People aren't afraid of the HOA anymore. But to get here, I had to become something I'm not entirely proud of. I had to become a warrior in a war I never wanted to fight. I proved that I was right, but I also learned that being right isn't always a clean feeling. It doesn't make you spotless. Nobody in this story is pure good. Not Karen, who let bitterness consume her. Not George, who couldn't own up to his mistakes. Not Fred, who was coasting on his parents' entitlement. And not me. I was just the guy who was stubborn enough to see it through to the very end. The guy who was willing to push the button on the crusher. Nobody is pure good. But sometimes you have to be the one who's good enough to finish it. Right isn't spotless. It's finished.